Historians of Reddit, what is the biggest fuck you moment in history? Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them. One of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send a very fast working one to Moscow, and I certainly won't have to send another to Joseph Stalin. If someone made a black comedy TV series about the Eastern Bloc, this would be one of the highlights. Have you seen The Death of Stalin? The Second Defenestration of Prague. The Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia sends representatives to the Protestant city of Prague telling them to convert to Catholicism. The representatives get thrown out a window and allegedly landed in a pile of manure. This was the first instance of a bounce check. No? God damn it, man. Not when I'm drinking. The Battle of Alicia. Julius Caesar's attacking some Gauls in modern day France, and they go hide in a castle on top of a hill. Caesar's army isn't big enough to take them all at once, and the Gauls have reinforcement coming, so a siege is impossible. So Caesar just builds a bigger castle around the one he's attacking. He literally just built 2 walls back to back in a ring around the castle. The first Gaul army was already too small to defeat Caesar, and his fortifications only gave him a greater advantage. The reinforcement were also unable to defeat Caesar's army, now that he was behind several layers of spike pits and both earthen and wooden walls. Plus the Gauls inside had no way to communicate with the reinforcement outside, so they couldn't coordinate attacks. Both Gallic armies were defeated as they attacked Caesar's newly built fortifications, and Caesar emerged victorious. It's probably my favorite battle of all time. The Romans had to build over 20 miles of walls, right? And they did it really fast. Crazy fast. I still don't get how you can build such an enormous structure in such a short span of time. I guess he did have a lethal army building it, which helps. Roman warfare is so damn fascinating. That humongous building, digging, walking and fighting machine seems so unreal to me. The construction and use of the war valve. Supposedly the largest trebuchet ever built. When it was disassembled it would fill up 30 wagons. So anyways, King Edward I built this to siege a Scottish castle, but before it was even built the Scottish people tried to surrender, to which Edward responded with a prompt no. In actuality he responded with you do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will. In other words, I built this trebuchet over 40 days and I'm most definitely going to use it, and proceeded to use a trebuchet anyways. I went to all the trouble to build this dank trebuchet and now you bet your ass I'm attest it. You could have surrendered when I asked. You could have surrendered a week in. But after 40 days there's no take-backses. Eat my trebuchet, noobs. A pirate known as Jane Lefford had a bounty of $500 put on him by a governor. So he put a $5,000 bounty on the governor. No you. So when France exiles Napoleon Bonaparte the first time, they didn't think to change out military personnel. So he basically rolls up to the first French outpost he gets to, says backquotes up and begins reassembling an army. By the time he gets to Paris, he's got enough forces that France is like, well, welcome back. He supposedly said to the first soldiers he encountered, any of you who dare oppose the emperor, fire. The soldiers cheered and joined him. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man owning his company that built tractors. He talked to Ferrari about the imperfections of his car and how to improve them, and they basically laughed at a young tractor mechanic trying to tell them about sport cars. So he decided to start making luxury sport cars to compete with Ferrari, and thus, the rivalry was born. So I'd say the middle finger of this guy to Ferrari was pretty noticeable. When Ford was about to buy Ferrari and noticed something in the paperwork that said Ford would not own a Ferrari race team, they were upset about this, and Enzo basically said Ford was too low to own such a great team. Later on Ford recruits Shelby Carroll and beats Ferrari at Le Mans, and has every single time since they've entered a car. It cost Ford about $440 million in today's money to win. They lost the first 2 times. Their cars conked out during the race, then started winning from the 3rd time. This is more petty, but when Taft bragged to his friends via Telegram about scaling a mountain on horseback, that it was a few thousand feet, clear weather, all in all not too difficult, his friend replied, how is horse? Taft was a chunky boy. Didn't he get stuck in his bathtub? In the 1970s a small town of Vulcan, West Virginia asked for state funding to replace a bridge into town. The state legislature refused to grant Vulcan the funding they needed. Instead the town appealed to the Soviet Union for aid. After hearing about the request, The state legislature immediately granted over $1 million for the town to build a new bridge. If a small town in WV asking for Soviet funding in the middle of the Cold War isn't a big middle finger to the state government, then I don't know what is. The funny part is that 2 Soviet representatives at the US Embassy actually came over to look at the broken bridge and seriously considered funding the rebuilding to piss off the Americans. Imagine the propaganda the Soviets could have pushed from that. Honestly, smart move by the town. Win for them, no matter who funds it. Napoleon invited his brother-in-law to speak with him before his coronation as emperor to remind the brother-in-law that he objected to Napoleon marrying Josephine because Napoleon would amount to nothing. Now this is the kind of petty fuck you I can get behind. French surrender in WW2. Hitler dictates that the French capitulation take place at Compiègne, a forest north of Paris. This is the same spot where 22 years earlier the Germans had signed the armistice ending World War I. Hitler intends to disgrace the French and avenge the German defeat. To further deepen the humiliation, he orders that the signing ceremony take place in the same railroad car that hosted the earlier surrender. The armistice is signed on June 22nd. Under its terms, 2/3 of France is to be occupied by the Germans. The French army is to be disbanded. In addition, France must bear the cost of the German invasion. I was hoping someone would post this. Hitler later destroyed the railroad carriage when things started going south for the Axis. Because how hilariously shitty would it have been to make them sign the next treaty in the same fucking railroad car? They'd probably keep it going. And over here, you can see the loser box. This railroad car is kept in storage until a nation gets stomped in warfare, at which point it is prepared for the signing of treaties. A centuries-long tradition. The you lose caboose. The miscarriage. Julius Caesar's death. At least he died surrounded by friends. The first recorded incident of a group project where most of the group doesn't do the fucking work. Genghis Khan to Shah al-Raddin. After the Khwarezmids plundered one of Genghis Khan's caravans, killed his people, and took his shit, he thought to take the diplomatic approach and send 2 envoys and an interpreter. Shah al-Raddin decided to be a dumbass about it. He shaved the heads of the envoys to shame them and sent them back with the head of the interpreter. Mr. Khan was kinda pissed. So he marched 200,000 of his boys and fucking annihilated their town with only 1/4 of that number even able to fight back. He was so pissed at the Shah that he had the rivers keeping the surrounding villages alive fully diverted, so that he would literally wipe al-Raddin's birthplace off the map and make it so that it was like he never existed. No one would settle there or live there ever again. No one would be there to remember his enemy who had disrespected him. Not even the dogs or cats would be spared, said Genghis Khan. You can still go see the ruins of the once great cities of the Khwarezmid Empire. They are huge and the wind blasts sand through the bleached bones of a civilization the Genghis Khan reduced to a wasteland for having disrespected him one time. Twice. Once for robbing his caravan, and once for the diplomats. They didn't play baseball back then, so the 3-strike rule didn't apply. Shame me once, and I'll try to be civil with you. Shame me twice, and I'll wipe your birthplace off the map. Shame me, can't get shamed again. Genghis Bush. On the crowning of King Henry VII, he backdated his own reign to before the date of the Battle of Bosworth, meaning anyone who was loyal to him now, but had shown any sign of opposition at Bosworth, was now a traitor and an enemy to the realm. Justice served. Fuck, that sounds like the premise behind the Blackadder. This requires some background. The Spartans were famously blunt. They were trained to get to the point when speaking, instead of using artsy and beautiful language that would have been common at the time, by being bitten on the thumb if they became long-winded. Now to the meat. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, sent the Spartans a letter saying, "Would you like me to enter your land as friend or foe?" The Spartans responded with one word: neither. Philip was irate. He then sent another long-winded message: "If once I enter into your territories, I will destroy you all, never to rise again." The Spartans then sent back one word: "If." It was like putting your head in a lion's mouth, and I love it. That's where the meaning of laconic comes from. Exactly. Laconia is pretty much another name for Sparta, and the people were called Lacedaemons. Not the biggest, probably, but the first that came to mind. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response to the Nazi demand that Bastogne surrender. Nuts. Nuts. The general's word echo clear. Nuts. The Nazis shall hear. Khosrow Anushirwan was a Shah of Iran in the 500s ACE. He took over a town, Antioch, that used to belong to the Byzantine Empire, ran by Emperor Justinian. But before he burned it to the ground, he had architects and a bunch of other people go through and record exactly what the city and its buildings looked like. He then built a new town that looked exactly the same and named it Antioch Khosrow, which translates roughly to Khosrow's better version of Antioch. My personal favorite, the beginning of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, in England, 1066. England's been invaded by a Norwegian army led by Harold Hardrada, King of Norway, and Tostig Godwinson, exiled English earl and estranged brother to the English king. They've already fought one battle. They've captured York. Things are looking good for them. They're chilling, enjoying their success, waiting at Stamford Bridge for the hostages they demanded. It's a hot day. They're not expecting any trouble. But wait, an English army shows up. That's practically impossible. The Battle of Fulford Gate had taken place only 5 days ago, and the Norwegians had completely routed the forces of the Northern Earls. The rest of the English army was known to be in the south, awaiting a Norman invasion. Turns out the English had ridden all the way up north in 4 days. The Norwegians were, understandably, a bit unhappy. They form into a circle. They don't have their armor with them. It's at the ships. It's too hot to be hanging around in mail. They've got helmets and shields and weaponry, and that's it. The English send a rider to negotiate. He tells Tostig that his brother the king is willing to offer him his earldom back and part of the rule of England if he gives up now. Tostig asks what his buddy Harold Hardrada gets for his trouble. 6 feet of English ground, or as much more as he needs. Being taller than other men, Tostig says they're done here. The rider rides away. Harold Hardrada asks who that dude was, because if it had been him talking, he'd have just killed the bastard there. Tostig says, oh, that's my brother. That's Harold Godwinson, the king. Harold Godwinson rode up to an enemy army personally and told the King of Norway, known to be a great warrior and general, that all he'd get from this invasion was a grave. Battle commences. Norwegians lose. Tostig and Harold Hardrada both die. Huge bloody mess. English army is crippled. And then 3 days later the Normans land in the south. Harold is fucked. He still marches his army back, gathers as much force as he can, and engages 3 weeks later. He's killed at Hastings. Normans conquer England. Basically a very personal fuck you moment that snowballed quite intensely. I love that line. Or as much as he needs. Being taller than other men. Not the biggest, but definitely one to note. In 1966, Charles de Gaulle ordered all US troops out of France. As he said the country was leaving NATO, LBJ's first words were to his Secretary of State, Dean Rusk. Ask him about the cemeteries, Dean. When Dean Rusk mentioned whether or not the 60,000 plus US soldiers buried in France were to be removed, de Gaulle simply stood up and left the room, embarrassed. I absolutely love this one. When Germanic tribes invaded Britain after the Romans left, they named the native Celts Wellisk, meaning foreigner, even though they themselves were the foreigners. That later became the word Welsh, which the English promptly adopted for phrases like, Welsh on a bed, TL, doctor. All of history has been one giant etymological middle finger to the Welsh. Yeah, but the Welsh language is itself a middle finger to English speakers. Henry VIII divorcing Catherine of Aragon. Henry VIII. I want a divorce. Church, we don't do that here. Henry VIII. I'll start my own church, with blackjack and hookers. When Otto von Bismarck was about 50, he was walking down a street when a man ran up to him and shot him 5 times. Otto then turned around and began to beat the absolute shit out of him until some armed guards come to help him. When they inspected Otto for wounds, they found that all 5 hit, but they all either just grazed him or bounced off his ribs. Literally the Iron Chancellor. German quality. When Alcibiades fucked the Spartan king's wife, then fled to Persia, became a high command, and made it back to Athens where he once started as a politicane, and became one again. He said fuck you to Athens. He betrayed them, Sparta and Persia, and got away with it, because he looked so damn good. Sounds like what happened between my ex-wife and neighbor. The reply of the Zaporozhian Cossacks is the best response to a demand for surrender, ever, in response to requests by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, to desist attacks and submit. Zaporozhian Cossacks to the Turkish Sultan. O Sultan, Turkish devil and am devil's kith and kin, secretary to Lucifer himself. What the devil kind of knight art thou, that canst not slay a hedgehog with your naked ass? The devil shits, and your army eats. Thou shalt not, thou son of a whore. Make subjects of Christian sons. We have no fear of your army. By land and by sea we will battle with thee. Fuck thy mother, thou Babylonian scullion, Macedonian wheelwright, brewer of Jerusalem, goat fucker of Alexandria, swineherd of Greater and Lesser Egypt, pig of Armenia, Podolian thief, catamite of Tartary, hangman of Commandants, and fool of all the world and underworld, an idiot before God, grandson of the serpent, and the Criconadic, pig snout, mare's ass, slaughterhouse cur, unchristened brow, screw thine own mother, so the Zaporozhians declare, you lowlife, you won't even be herding pigs for the Christians. Now we'll conclude, for we don't know the date, and don't own a calendar, the moon's in the sky, the year with the Lord, the day's the same over here as it is over there, for this kiss our ass. Kashovai Otam and Ivan Serko, with the whole Zaporozhian host. Ooh, subtle. In AD 1937 the new Roman Emperor Gaius, better known by the nickname Caligula, built a bridge across the sea. It stretched 3 miles across the deep blue waters of the Bay of Naples at ancient Rome's most fashionable seaside resort of Baiae. But Caligula's was no ordinary bridge. It was a temporary, floating structure built on wooden pontoons. A costly and impressive feat of engineering. It served a single purpose before being dismantled. On a day of boiling heat watched by crowds of spectators, Caligula rode across the bridge. His armor glinted in the sunlight, for the 24-year-old emperor had dressed himself in the golden breastplate of the legendary Greek hero Alexander the Great. On the following day Caligula made the journey in reverse, this time riding in a chariot, followed by soldiers of his personal guard. It was a pointless piece of showmanship, lost on the majority of the crowd, several of whom fell drunkenly to their deaths in the sea after 2 days partying. One historian claimed Caligula pulled the stunt to disprove a prophecy that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. Threatening to make his horse a consul was also in the same vein. It wasn't a serious consideration born out of madness, but rather an insult to the Senate. Either my horse can do a better job than any of you, or I can make my horse consul and you can't do anything about it. The first cell phone. The first call ever made from a cell phone was to a competitor's landline. Big dick energy. After the Restoration, the English dug up the body of Oliver Cromwell and hung, drawn and quartered the body, sticking the head on London Bridge. I'm not an historian, but I know this WW1 fact. In 1918 during the Battle of Villers Britanniques, Major James Robertson made a plan to steal a German tank stuck in no man's land. There was no point in getting it, because it was dangerous going out there, and the tank wasn't a threat to anyone. Not giving fuck about that, he grouped with 12 other men to retrieve that tank, under machine gun fire and inside mustard gas, just to say to the German army, fuck you, look what we got here. Thanks to him, and the other men. Today that tank is the only original WW1 tank we have, and it's called Mephisto. It's not the only original WW1 tank, it's the only original German WW1 tank. On 30th September 1938, a treaty called Munich Agreement was signed, causing Germany's annexation of Sudetenland, a region of western Czechoslovakia, where many German people lived. It was signed by leaders of UK, France, Italy and Germany. UK and France signed it, because Hitler promised that he won't go to war if he got the Sudetenland. We all know how that turned out, but that's not all. The biggest fuck you to Czechoslovakia was that they weren't invited to the meeting. Yes, they weren't invited to the meeting about their own region. Also France was an ally of Czechoslovakia at the time. So yeah, thanks for support France. Sorry for any mistakes. English is not my first language. Also, my first Reddit post. Andrew Jackson was walking around Washington DC when an assassin tried to kill him with 2 pistols. Both pistols misfired, and Jackson proceeded to beat the would-be killer within an inch of his life with his cane. Well, I mean, who brings 2 pistols to a cane fight anyway?